Hello everyone, there was a time when the sun never set on the British Empire. From the vast lands of India to the coasts of Africa, from the Caribbean islands to the farthest corners of the Pacific, the British flag flew high and proud. But how did a small island nation in Europe manage to rule over a quarter of the world's population and dominate the globe for centuries? This is the story of how the British Empire ruled the world. It all began in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. Britain was not yet the global powerhouse we know from history. It was a relatively small kingdom, surrounded by powerful rivals like France and Spain. But the British had something extraordinary: an ambition to explore, to trade, and to conquer. Inspired by explorers like Christopher Columbus, British sailors set out across the seas to find new lands and opportunities. The first great step came with the establishment of overseas colonies. In 1607, Jamestown in Virginia became the first permanent English settlement in North America. From there, the British expanded steadily across the American East Coast. They didn't just stop there, they went further to the Caribbean, to Africa, and eventually to Asia. Their early colonies were built on trade, particularly in sugar, tobacco, and cotton. These goods were transported back to Britain, making the country rich and powerful. But the true strength of the British Empire wasn't just in its colonies, it was in its navy. The Royal Navy became the backbone of Britain's global dominance. By the 18th century, it was the most powerful naval force in the world, protecting trade routes, transporting soldiers, and ensuring that no rival nation could challenge Britain's control of the seas. Whoever ruled the waves, ruled the world, and Britain did exactly that. In the 1700s, the British East India Company emerged as one of the most influential organizations in history. Originally established for trade with the East Indies, it soon became a political and military power in its own right. Through a mixture of diplomacy, force, and clever alliances, the company gradually took control of large parts of India. After the Battle of Plassey in 1757, Britain's grip on the Indian subcontinent tightened, and by the mid-19th century, India was known as the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. India's resources of spices, cotton, tea, and manpower have fueled Britain's industrial growth. But British rule also brought suffering. Heavy taxation, famines, and exploitation left deep scars on the Indian people. Still, from London's point of view, India was the key to maintaining global dominance. Meanwhile, in Africa, the story was different but equally impactful. Britain played a central role in the transatlantic slave trade during the 17th and 18th centuries, transporting millions of Africans to the Americas to work on plantations. The profits from this brutal trade built cities, funded wars, and strengthened Britain's economy. Later, when public pressure grew, Britain became one of the first nations to abolish the slave trade in 1807, turning its navy into an anti-slavery force patrolling the seas. But by then, the empire had already grown immensely wealthy. In the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution transformed Britain into the workshop of the world. British factories produced goods faster and cheaper than anyone else. To keep those factories running, Britain needed raw materials, and to sell its products, it needed new markets. This economic hunger drove further expansion into Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. By the time Queen Victoria took the throne in 1837, Britain controlled an empire that spanned continents. The saying "the sun never sets on the British Empire" wasn't just poetic, it was a literal truth. When night fell in London, the sun still shone on British lands somewhere in the world. Whether it was Australia, India, Canada, or South Africa, the empire became a global network of trade, communication, and influence. English became the language of business and administration. British law, education, and culture spread across the globe. But with great power came great resistance. In North America, the American colonies rebelled against British rule in 1776. Declaring independence and forming the United States. Though this was a major loss, Britain learned from it. Instead of direct control, they began creating new forms of governance as self-rule under the British Crown. This model later shaped Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, turning them into loyal dominions rather than rebellious colonies. In Asia, resistance grew as well. The Indian Rebellion of 1857 marked the turning point. The uprising, led by Indian soldiers and civilians, was brutally suppressed, but it ended the rule of the East India Company. From then on, India was governed directly by the British Crown, with Queen Victoria proclaimed Empress of India in 1876. By the late 19th century, the British Empire had reached its peak. It controlled around 1/4 of the world's land and population. The empire built vast railways, telegraph lines, ports, and cities. London became the center of global finance and decision-making. The British pound was the world's most powerful currency, and the Royal Navy ensured at least peace on Britain's terms. But cracks were beginning to show. The cost of maintaining such a vast empire was enormous. Local movements for independence were growing stronger. In Ireland, India, Africa, and the Middle East, people began to demand freedom and self-determination. The empire faced new challenges in the 20th century: two world wars that would ultimately seal its fate. During World War I, millions of soldiers from across the empire fought for Britain. Indian, African, and Australian troops fought alongside the British on distant battlefields. The war left Britain victorious but deeply weakened. The economic toll was massive, and the idea of empire was starting to be questioned. Then came World War II. Britain once again stood firm against Nazi Germany, but the cost of victory was even higher this time. After 1945, the empire was exhausted. The United States and the Soviet Union had emerged as superpowers, and the age of empires was fading. The movement for decolonization gained unstoppable momentum. India won its independence in 1947, followed by dozens of other colonies across Asia and Africa. Within a few decades, the once mighty British Empire transformed into the Commonwealth, a voluntary association of independent nations that share historical and cultural ties with Britain. Today, the British Empire is gone, but its legacy remains everywhere. English is the most widely spoken second language in the world. Parliamentary democracy, common law, and systems of education and governance in many countries have British roots. Even modern global trade routes and political alliances can trace their origins back to Britain's imperial past. However, this legacy is complex. While Britain brought advancements in infrastructure, science, and governance, it also left behind a trail of exploitation, cultural destruction, and inequality. Many countries are still grappling with the long-term effects of colonial rule. Debates about reparations, stolen artifacts, and the darker side of imperialism continue to this day. Yet, from a historical perspective, it's undeniable that the British Empire shaped the modern world more than almost any other force. It connected continents, accelerated globalization, and set the stage for the modern political and economic systems we see today. The world map, languages, trade routes, and even global cuisine bear traces of British influence. As time passes, historians continue to debate whether the empire was a force for progress or oppression. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. For millions, it was a time of suffering and loss. For others, it brought education, infrastructure, and new opportunities. But one thing is certain: that the British Empire changed history forever. So, how did Britain rule the world? Through its navy, trade, innovation, and an unmatched sense of ambition. But above all, through a combination of opportunity and timing. When other empires rose and fell, Britain adapted, evolved, and reinvented its influence. And though its empire may have vanished, the idea of Britain as a global power still lingers, woven deeply into the story of our modern world. Thank you for watching Empire Stories. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible tales of power, ambition, and the rise and fall of empires.